Today on the Coach Y podcast, we have a very special guest. He's the head volleyball coach at Caldwell Community College. In just 3 years, he has taken his team to finish 10th nationally in the 2023 JUCO Championships, when that same year he got Region 10 and Mid-Atlantic Coach of the Year. In 2024, his team was ranked the entire season, as well as going 23-4. Today, we welcome Coach Brian Harris to the Coach Y podcast.
With the world of coaching evolving and the carousel always changing, we're going to sit down with some coaches and we're going to figure out what they coach, how they coach, and most importantly, why they got into this profession. My name is Kason Wilkinson, and I am your host of the Coaches Y podcast.
That was my Coaches Y.
Welcome back to another Coaches Y podcast. We have a very special guest in the house today, Coach Harris, coming all the way from Caldwell Community College. He is the volleyball coach up there. Coach, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me.
Of course. I appreciate you hopping on the show today. And I usually kind of dive into, who you are as a person, how everything, when you got involved with the sport, things like that. But for me personally, I might change it up a little bit today and kind of ask you a little bit about how your season went, right? So how did the season go for you this year? And, what were some of the highlights from 2024?
Season went really well. 23-4. We were ranked nationally in junior college D3 for the whole season. So we were preseason ranked and then stayed ranked throughout the season. Unfortunately, we did not get an at-large bid to the national tournament, which I thought was unfortunate because I thought we deserved it. Right. But other than that, it was great. We dealt with a lot of injuries this year and were able to overcome it. We had an All-American on a roster that one of the teams that we lost to that went to the national tournament, she dislocated her kneecap in her second matchup where we ended up losing that match. So we had to make some adjustments the last couple of weeks of the season. But overall, very, very happy with it. Again, it's 2 years in a row we've been ranked. And
Dang. Let's see. So going 23-4 is pretty damn good. So I guess my question is I would assume just from the outside, being a person that's not, obviously I'm not associated with volleyball like that, that would be quality enough to get to the postseason in that level. So I guess what are they? How many teams go to the postseason or get that bid, and then how do you even make it in, especially when you have a record of that sort?
Right. So in the NJCAA, there are 16 teams that get invited to nationals. 12 of those are automatic qualifiers, and it's honestly kind of a weird system because some conferences get 2 bids and then some conferences have to play what's called districts. And so kind of 2 conferences fighting for one spot. Yeah. So there's 12 of those teams that go, and then they have 4 at-large teams.
Gotcha. So just didn't fall in your favor this year. Just wasn't
right.
It.
So another team in our conference, which is Sandhills, last year, kind of almost the same exact thing happened. We split with them. Almost the same thing. We had an injury to one of our top players, and then we played them again in the conference finals and beat them that time. And then we went to districts. This was last year, and beat a team from Pennsylvania. And so we went to nationals last year, and almost the reverse of that happened. So we beat them the first time and then lost to them again. Injury happened. They beat us in the conference finals. We were both they were ranked 6th. Right. We were ranked 7th in the nation at the time. They beat that same team in Pennsylvania. We thought we were going to go to nationals for an at-large bid, and we didn't go. So we lost to 2 teams this year. One of them was the 4th ranked team, Sandhills, and then another team that was a higher division than us. So,
wow. That's crazy. Like I said, just from an outside looking in, that's Do you think that that the system, and I'm not trying to make you sound too opinionated here, but but like just like college football, right? Like they had to expand the playoff because there's more quality of football and things like that. And just in general, right? Like baseball's done that in professional leagues and things like that. Obviously, like Omaha, things like that. Do you think that there should be, or do you think that in the future that might be something that JUCO volleyball may look into, or maybe should consider, or maybe kind of do something different for, I wouldn't say realignment, but maybe like qualification things to get teams in that makes it more even?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's something that I've talked with some people about because last year when it happened with Sandhills, they were ranked 9th in the nation and they got overlooked. And so, we felt like they should have gotten a bid to go. I think the thing that's kind of unusual about it is there's 10 regions or conferences. And like I said, some of them get 2 bids and some of them have to fight for 1 bid. So it seems to me that if you're going to have at large, just give the 10 conference champions the automatic qualifiers,
Yep.
And then pick 6 of the next best teams.
That's fair.
So
I think, it sounds like that could be, as I said again, with somebody who's not involved with it like that, I think that just off of what you're mentioning sounds like could be and probably should be, which I say should, but sounds like it could be the most respective way across the board for every team to have a shot, especially if you're ranked, but also if you've done what you need to do in regular season, right? Like that's the whole reason for in season and having a season is what have you done to get to this point, and if you've done everything, whatever the case is. That's a whole nother conversation for another day. But yes, I do think that's interesting. So, but I will say that even though you didn't get the at-large bid, congratulations on the season. Sounds like it was very good. And I will have some more questions on that a little bit later. But before we dive into that, and obviously your coaching journey, I want to talk a little bit about who you are as the person. So go ahead and kind of let myself and everybody else know kind of where you grew up, where you're from, and then kind of when you got involved in sports, and then maybe even diving into when you got involved with volleyball, if that was something that you did, growing up, or maybe just was around.
Sure. Yeah, so I grew up in Florida, was there until really through college and getting married, and then moved to North Carolina. But I grew up kind of, as you can tell, a little bit older, so I'm in my mid-50s. Grew up, when it was basketball season, you played basketball, and it was baseball season, you played baseball. And So I grew up playing everything under the sun. You got home from school, you dropped your books and went out and played in the side yard and, that sort of thing. Dads were the coaches of the, little league teams and all of that stuff. So,
of course,
growing up, I played literally every sport. I played football, basketball, soccer, baseball, tennis, all of that. And I just love sports. And so that was kind of the thing, is that's what we did. And when I got to really high school, then I decided that I was going to kind of focus on tennis. And I, again, played every sport possible. And to be honest, I didn't have a whole lot of self-confidence in sports, even though like kind of deep down, I knew I was pretty athletic. I just didn't know what other people thought of me. So, I played tennis in high school. Probably should have played some other sports for the high school. I just didn't. Right. But I was always around it. I was like a student athletic trainer, and it's one of those things like you'd watch football on TV, and I'd watch it for 10 minutes, and I'd go, "Hey, you want to go throw football?"
Of course.
You play basketball, and you go, you'd run outside,
shoot some hoops. Of course. Stay active.
Yeah. So my dad played small college basketball. So we had a basketball goal in our backyard.
I understand that.
Yeah. So it was just one of those things that's what we did. So anyway, I played tennis through high school. Had some experience with volleyball, but in Florida, ironically, it just wasn't a huge boys' sport.
Yeah.
And so honestly, probably the biggest thing for me, probably character-wise, is when I went to college, this was back in the 80s, is there wasn't a whole lot of recruitment happening. And so I had already decided I was going to go to the Citadel.
Okay.
Happened to contact the coach, the tennis coach, and I said, hey, I'd like to try to walk on. So he was like, yeah, that's great. This was kind of a legend at the time. He had the courts named after him type of thing.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And so I showed up with my tennis racket and stuff. And, it was one of those things I just was like, there's no way I'm going to make a college tennis team,
Yeah.
It was like in high school, I was like the number 3 seed in Florida. Florida was pretty strong,
probably pretty solid. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but my thought was, I'm going to try it. And if I make it, that's great. And if I don't, at least I said I did. So I made the team, which again, to me was honestly kind of a life altering moment just to put yourself out there and go through it. So,
and you were mentioning like how you didn't have a lot of confidence in sports growing up, right? And I know that even though you transitioned to focus just on tennis, you just didn't have that. So was the moment that you made the team and got to actually overcome maybe a little bit of that self-doubt, did that change your mental approach, not only for the rest of your time playing tennis, but as you developed into like a man after college and everything like that as well?
Yeah, I think for me, it was, you just never know until you try. And I think it was the character moment that I, referring to was willing to not be good enough, which, was always one of those things like growing up is I wanted, like, I had some anger issues while playing because I wanted to be good and I wanted to be the best I could be. And I wanted people to know I was trying. And, so there were just moments that was just really tough to kind of, if you weren't playing your best. I mean, I know you got background in football and wrestling is, you wanted to know that you were good.
For sure.
And, making the team was almost kind of a shock to me just because I didn't feel like I played all that well in tryouts and stuff. But, I think it was one of those things that as a coach, you see athletes and you go, this person has something that I want. And I felt like that coach kind of said the same thing, like with me is, yeah, this is somebody that I can help. What was kind of interesting is like through that is, he was an older guy. He was kind of a father figure. I mean, my dad was very, very involved, but he was kind of like my dad away from home. And, he was always willing to have people over to his house and, kind of a place away from school and everything. So
made you feel comfortable outside of the court for sure. I understand that, having a coach that is like that in your life, regardless of if it's truly, a father figure or mother figure, or as you mentioned, kind of that secondary is I think very important to young athletes, but also as a coach, right? I'm assuming that, and I'll ask this, or you might be, I'm sure you'll dive into it a bit later, but I'm sure you implement some of those things that you learned from, or, that experience, I should say, that you had from him that you implement into your everyday as a coach now. And going back to what you mentioned about like anger issues, I know that, I'm very hard on myself. I still, to this day, whether it's coaching or just life, I'm probably the biggest self-critic you're going to find, right? And I've had to learn how to kind of deal with that and to overcome that. And, I've had kids that are that way too. So I guess my question for you is do you see that in athletes either, I guess it might be a two-parter here. One, are you recruiting girls that you might see like, oh, this girl's really tough on herself and she wants the best type of thing, right? And secondly to that question is, if you're not seeing that, but obviously as they get to college and they might struggle, and I said this in another episode, they might struggle to develop, right? So they start getting harder on themselves. How do you coach, maybe somebody who has that that anger that they build up from whatever, like how do you coach that? So I guess you can answer that in that two-parter.
Yeah. What was kind of like with my personality, to put it in context, is when I was playing tennis, John McEnroe, Jimmy Connors, those were kind of the stars at the time. And for those that may be listening that don't know, John McEnroe is Like he was very, very boisterous. He was very critical. My mom hated him because he was just almost kind of verbally abusive to umpires and stuff like that.
Gotcha.
But I took a little bit of that sort of personality. So if I was frustrated, it was not uncommon for me to yell. And I think a really defining moment for me is when my dad just basically said, "I'm not going to play with you anymore if you're going to act like that." It was one of those things where it was just like this realization of it's not just me. It's like the outlook of how he interpreted that. And the reason why I mention that is, you talk about athletes, and we have a tendency as athletes to think that it only impacts us.
Right.
Like if you show your frustration is that, that it only impacts us. And for those that don't, volleyball to me is such a team sport. And so when we're talking to athletes about how they impact others on the court is when they get self-absorbed on their frustrations, whether it's internal and they shut down or whether it's explosive, like I had the tendency to be, is I don't think young athletes see how much of an impact it has on their teammates. And so for me growing up and my dad kind of calling me out on it is something that I try to instill on other players is you have to understand the impact that you have on the people around you. And so if you shut down, how do your teammates respond to that? And so my kind of outlook as a coach is how do you work out of that? And so my thing is, when I explained to the athletes, like it didn't help me play better to yell or scream or do whatever that was destructive does it help you to get better if you shut down? Does it help you bring your teammate? Like if you're not playing well, what are you going to do to play better? Like if you're not hitting well, what else can you do? And to focus on those aspects of it. It's funny that you started to ask about recruiting and like picking players and stuff. So I have kind of an interesting story. So before I got into college, I was coaching high school like most people do. And so I had a player on my team, very, very good player. So to put this in context, high school players that touch above 9 feet is what's expected. And so when you get into junior college, D2, D3, as you start getting into mid nines, and then you get into anybody that's playing D1 is 10 foot and above. In other words, their approach touch. Yep. So this girl touched 10-1. So she was very, very athletic. She was only probably 5'9", 5'10", so she had some really good hops. But she was all over the place psychologically. So anyway, she was essentially the best player on the team. So she started as a freshman, working up through JV and everything else and learned the game. Well, because of behavior similar to what I experienced, she just happened to do it in the wrong setting. I ended up kicking her off of the high school team. So it was really, really challenging time for me as a coach, as a parent, because at the time my daughter was on that team, dealing with the parents, the AD, all of that stuff that comes with it. The thing that's kind of interesting is she goes on and plays her first year in college. She plays at a D2 college, so it didn't ruin her college or anything like that. Well, then that's when COVID happened, and then I became a JUCO coach at a local coach. And so I happened to run across her in the grocery store, and I asked her what she's up to. So, she tells me that she was at that one school, that she's left, and that she was now taking classes at the school I was at.
Oh, wow.
And so I was like, interesting. And I'm like, are you still playing? And she was like, well, I'm kind of interested. And I said, well, do you know who the coach is? And she goes, yeah, I was going to email you, but I wasn't sure and stuff. Anyway, so we start talking, and I welcome her onto the team. And what's interesting about it is, you wonder about life decisions as young people, and giving second chances and people
Right.
learning from mistakes, because I mean, we all do stupid stuff as young people.
Young, of course.
And so it ended up, it was a very, very good experience from that, because obviously we mended the relationship. She played well for us. She had some issues once she left the program, but it was something that I was really, really excited about, and given an opportunity to kind of recover from that sort of high school experience.
Right.
So,
Well, for one, I appreciate that story because, a lot of that I know for a fact there's a lot of kids out there who have dealt with that personally who didn't get an opportunity to come back. And so I think it was just, for one, maybe like small world thing, like, dang, I can't, like, really, that's really, whenever you said that, I was like, wow, what are the odds that person's now taking classes at your school, right? But it's really cool that you were willing to take that, that experience from back then to, move past it and to allow her to get that second chance. And, so you are not afraid to take on, I guess anger or some of those things that might be that, who knows what she was dealing with off the court to cause that on the court. Right. And I know I preach, and I know coaches have always preached to me, even throughout high school and stuff, was whenever you lace up, whatever your issues are, you leave them out at the door. Right. And then same thing with work, you're not supposed to take your issues home, vice versa. But sometimes it's a lot to where, it's just kind of rolls over, right, to whatever you're doing in life. So I respect that you definitely took her over and did that. So I guess my question for you now is, and you kind of mentioned it to like your dad whenever he said, I'm not going to play with you anymore if you're going to act like that. But what coach or coaches, plural, it has impacted your life at any point, right? So I guess what has there ever been a coach who made an impact on your life? And if so, why and who?
I mean, I think to some degree, my dad. I think to some degree, the tennis coach when I was at the Citadel. Right now I watch a lot of content on, motivational stuff. I also teach math classes. I'm fascinated, like my original degree is in psychology. So I'm fascinated on why people learn, like, how does failure impact their successes? So I wouldn't necessarily say it's one particular coach. I think there are times that things stand out to me more so than others. But lots from personal experiences. Some of it is from my daughters because they both played volleyball through high school. I love talking shop with other coaches, other disciplines. It doesn't have to be volleyball because I love sports. So that's why I was so interested in the podcast that you have.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. Yeah. I mean, and, I've said this multiple times through it, but, I started this selfishly because I wanted to learn how to be a better high school coach and just a better coach in general. And then it just kind of spiraled to where, every coach I talked to, I learned something different, right? Or sometimes it might not be different, but it's just maybe different approaches. But yeah, I 1000% agree. Talking to different coaches of different disciplines, I think helps out. Also, too, kind of keeps your head away from your sport. So you're kind of, I wouldn't say forced to, but you are essentially forced to think of other, approaches that they're doing that you might be able to then bring back to your sport, right? I actually had a coach on here not too long ago. She was a softball coach, and she mentioned she went to a baseball convention, similar but obviously different. And she's like, that was one of the greatest things I ever did because even though it's not a softball convention or teachings, I was able to take a lot of like the coaching side of it on the personal and blah, blah, blah. Right. So, I definitely agree with what you're mentioning, and I do appreciate your interest and love the interactions with it. And, I want to get every single style coach, I even want to move on to like getting, maybe like business professional coaches too, right? Like coaches that are in the entrepreneurship world or, sales world or whatever they're doing. Cause I think that they have stuff that even though it might not be sports related, but who knows, right? There might be something that they teach their professionals that we can do on that side too. So, yeah, I really appreciate you jumping on. And I usually do this at the end, but I'm going to do it a little earlier. If you guys are still listening to this episode, make sure you guys, if you're on YouTube, HTB, hit that bell, like, subscribe, all the 9 yards. If you guys are on an audio listener, Apple Podcast, Spotify, PocketCasts, wherever, make sure you guys leave a review. Leave a review, hit the star, say what you got to say. Whatever you have to say it with your chest because we want to hear it. That's a tongue twister. I don't care. Sometimes it's smoother than others, but that's a tongue twister to make sure you say that sometimes. So I appreciate you jumping on again and kind of diving into you as the person and mentioning some of those things. So that'll lead me to asking you, when did you decide coaching is what you wanted to do, right? So like you've been through a lot of things in your life, as you mentioned, playing different sports. You played tennis, and you found your way coaching volleyball. Sorry, I just talked softball, so apologies. Volleyball. So I mean, when was it that you decided that you wanted to coach? What was the moment that was like, this is what I want to do?
So just to back up just a touch. So I played some college tennis, and then I think it's important. The very, very end of my freshman year, the coach that was kind of the father figure passed away right before a practice. And so I decided that I wasn't going to go through a new coach and everything else. It just was a little bit of a challenging experience. So then I wanted to just play every sport possible. And then that's kind of what started my volleyball journey. So at the school, some friends and I had started a men's club volleyball team. And so we got a coach and we started to work and go play tournaments and stuff. And so that's kind of how I got involved with volleyball. And then after graduation, played in some adult leagues and so on and so forth. And so getting to the coaching aspect is when we moved from Florida to North Carolina in 2005, when I was getting a teaching position, they just said, hey, we got a position for a volleyball coach. Do you want to coach? And I was like, yeah, I'd love to coach. Yeah. So that's kind of how I got into it. The opportunity arose. I will tell you, I was a crappy coach to start with because I didn't know enough about how to coach the sport and how to coach women in particular. Or girls, because it was a middle school at the time. Yeah. And there were times that I would come home from a match and my wife would call me on some of my stuff and she's like, essentially do better. And so, like with most things, I wanted to be good. And so I started to pay attention to content and reading and getting better. And then, started to realize, I really like this sport. It's really complex. And so just wanted to get better and better. And then my girls wanted to start playing. And so they started getting involved. And then when they got involved, I would watch other coaches like we all do. And, I'd try to see, okay, am I saying that or seeing the same things that the coaches that I like? Because I didn't always watch my daughters. I would go watch the coaches that I liked. Yeah. And and I would go, I'm seeing the same things that I was mentioning. And so I'd start going, I think I could actually be pretty decent at this. And which just fueled more fire of get better, get better, get better. So
yeah, just always wanted to improve your craft, which is exactly how I feel like that's one of the biggest things as a coach is how do we continue to get better. And I've loved the reading part that you mentioned because I think that we can see content and stuff all the time, but especially in today's world, taking a step back and really like taking away from the video and audio things and like just reading, especially because there's so many great coaches that have been that kind of get overlooked, right? Like Bear Bryant back in Alabama days, or like Dan Gable in wrestling, right? Like some of these people, or in your sport, I'm sure there's some historic coaches that have written something, or maybe something in a similar or maybe, I don't know. I don't know, but I'm sure there's coaches that you have, you know, you love to read what they have to say, and it kind of takes a step back. So for me, I like the reading part because it really shuts my mind off from everything else, and it forces me to understand a little bit deeper. So I can definitely appreciate you mentioning the reading side of things, not just the content, not just the videos, right? It's the reading.
Yeah. And, you know, going to workshops and listening to kind of Hall of Fame coaches talk about how they would teach a certain concept or a drill or something like that is always fascinating, and just how approachable some of these, again, world-class Hall of Fame coaches that, you know, you watch on, you know, national tournaments and win national championships, and then you're just standing around having a conversation with them like, you know, you're up here, which you are, but you kind of like, you know, John Dunning is a guy that grew up. Yeah, that he didn't start as a volleyball player. He was kind of got asked to be a volleyball coach. This was a long time ago. He's now since retired, but you know, it's kind of the same thing as this. And Karch Karai, who is the women's national team coach, who's now the men's national team coach, who, you know, he talks about he just wants to get better all the time. And this is widely regarded as the best male player ever. And he talks about still wanting to learn and get better. And I think that's the thing that's so interesting about sports in general is like it's evolving all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And whenever you feel like you kind of have an idea of that you know what you're doing, is that some other concept or perspective comes along, and there's always something to learn, which is what's fascinating to me.
100%. Always something to gain from it and to grow from. So, whenever you're talking about, you know, your coaching time and everything that you've been through, right? You know, you go to these workshops, you do all this, right? And I know you said that you would go to watch some of your favorite coaches and just listen and see if you're picking up the same cues and things like that. I guess let me know and let everybody know, how long have you been doing this? And then where did you start? I know you said you started in middle school and you've kind of worked your way up to now, right? So I guess kind of give us a timeline of when you started and how long, or where you started and how long you've been doing this for.
So coaching has been 20 years, basically. And I've coached middle school, high school, club, and now college. So, and it's fascinating. To me, it just doesn't get old. And again, it's even just a couple years ago, we changed kind of everything that I did as far as like offense, defense sort of systems, and just because of data and learning and stuff like that. So, yeah, it's been about 20 years. Again, love the mental aspect of college. Yeah.
So whenever you've been through all these different levels, right? What were some of the biggest maybe changes to the coaching what was some of the biggest things that you've had to do change-wise, maybe from high school to college? And then what are some of the things that might have stuck out to you on the level of like maybe challenges or something that you may not have realized going from each level?
Yeah, I think one of the things that as a male athlete, you know, there was always, in going to military colleges, there was always something about kind of a brotherhood of going through trials and tribulations to do bonding. And I think in female sports that doesn't always work. I think that there needs to be bonding before the trials and tribulations. And I think early on I think that's why I wasn't a very good coach I wasn't very sensitive to that. I coached kind of how I was coached, which didn't always translate well. You know, it was a little bit like if somebody got hurt, you didn't always run over to make sure that they were okay, and that didn't always translate very well. So I think what one of the things that I try to do is, and I think this has evolved over the last probably 15 years, is being more aware of that mistakes aren't failures and to vocalizing it. I always knew that as a player, but I don't think players now realize that mistakes are bad. And so I talk a lot about, I think the different colleges, to me, colleges, we work on certainly the physical aspect of it, but I spend a lot more time talking about the mental aspect of it, of why are we running this play? Why are we trying to do this? Like, what is the rationale behind it? What are you seeing? What does that information tell you? It doesn't mean we don't cover that in other levels, but I think to some degree, if you're coaching high school, is you're teaching a lot of skills before teaching the mental aspect.
So something that I kind of learned and something that's been used when it comes to like the junior college level is that it's kind of a revolving door. But I know I've kind of talked to you earlier. We kind of touched on a little bit about like girls that you're recruiting and I guess it was more of the anger question that we dove in on. But what is something that you are, when it comes to recruiting, how are you finding these girls? Are you looking at NCSA website, things like that? Are you looking at just relationships that you built over time, or are you, going to tournaments, state tournaments, watching film? I mean, how are you finding your athletes, and how are you getting them to commit to you at your school?
Yeah, it's a great question. Excuse me. I think it's a variety of things. So NCSA is a site that I use. Sports Recruits is another. There's another one called Field Level. And so if you don't know that, the program at Caldwell is only 3 years old.
Okay.
So when I started, basically what I did, because I know from high school that, you go in and you can pull coaches' information from there. And so I created a spreadsheet that had every coach email or AD's email that I created just through doing homework.
Yep.
And, would send emails before the year, after the year, like after the season, and just said, hey, I'm looking for players type of thing. I was coaching club at the time, so I would, try to run across players. That's a much harder aspect, to be honest, than doing that. Some was just contacting coaches, relationships that I've had in the past. So it's a really big mixed bag. Sometimes it's just purely asking, do you know anybody that's interested? Junior college recruiting is really kind of interesting because there's all sorts of goods and challenges that come from it.
Yep.
So some of the goods are, sometimes you're looking for players that maybe are going to do nursing, so they know, okay, the first 2 years I can play and do school, and then after that I'm really not going to have time. So sometimes they're looking specifically of, I'm just going to play 2 years and I want to have fun, and I don't have the time commitment to play, at a D2 sort of schedule where I'm
Right.
It's almost a second job sort of thing. Sometimes it's they want to stay home, stay local, so they don't want to travel far. So you get local girls. Almost everybody comes from the state. I don't get a whole lot of out-of-state girls unless they're moving to the area for a particular reason.
I got you.
It does happen occasionally. The area that I'm in is just north of Charlotte. So we're about an hour north of Charlotte, a little bit more than that. So I don't get a whole lot of girls here that play for a year somewhere else and then move back home. just because we don't have the population density. It did happen a little bit at the previous school that I was at. So a lot of it is just purely feet on the ground, talking to a lot of people.
Yeah. I know it's like junior college, and you touched on it about maybe some girls are only doing this for 2 year, and that's kind of what they're doing it for. But I'm sure there are some girls that you may encounter that want to go to a 4-year school, but you're kind of like that stepping stone for whatever their reasons are to go to your school first before going there. So how is that for you as a coach, trying to get girls in, and for one, to develop them, but also two, to know that for some of these girls, they want to go to a 4-year school. So you doing that side of things as well.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And I think with a transfer portal, that's actually kind of helped me to some degree, simply from the standpoint of changing schools now is almost become commonplace.
Yep.
It's not a daunting task to say, well, I'm going to go play here for a year or two, and then I'm going to transfer. I think maybe 5 or 6 years ago that was a much harder sell, to be honest. So I would say probably half of the girls are interested in moving on and playing at a 4-year, about half are not. Most of the ones that want to play are able to. I think the volleyball, the junior college level, particularly over the last 10, 15 years, there's some really, really good players that are playing junior college. And I think for some of them, it's purely that, again, some of them just want to stay home a little bit longer. It's cheaper.
Yeah.
It's not uncommon for girls, because most of the girls that we're looking at are playing D2, D3, NAIA, and those are all private, most part.
Of course, yeah.
And so even if they get a scholarship, they still have a pretty big tuition bill that they're looking at. And it's happened where somebody goes, hey, I had, this university saying that they want me and they gave me a great package, but I can't afford that package yet. And so I'm going to save as much money as possible. And so that's helped. I mean, I've, like everybody else, I want the best players possible. So.
Yeah. And of course, I know that's a big deal. So, I actually have done quite a bit of research to the Carolinas when it comes to the amount of schools. There's actually way more junior colleges than I thought were in my head than I actually realized, right, in North Carolina. And obviously there's quite a few Division I's and kind of a good mixture of every level out there, actually, especially in those 2, 3, 4 states, right? West Virginia, Tennessee, of course, right? Obviously the 2 Carolinas. So do you find it difficult to get girls to commit to you, knowing that there are so many options and that there are so many potential, I guess, battles, right? Or people that you're maybe battling for? Have you noticed that might be difficult when it comes to that?
Yeah, and I think what's challenging, on any aspect is trying to figure out where they want to be and having an open conversation with people. I'm pretty straightforward with recruits, and kind of my thing with them is I'll tell you whatever you need to know about the school, and I'm not going to try to lie to you to try to get you to come to me, because I mean, that's a pretty bad way to start a relationship. So I think one of the challenges is just having a conversation where people can be honest. And what I tell girls is, if Caldwell is not the right place, that's great. I get told no all the time. Just tell me no. If you want to go to a 4-year school and that's where you want to go, awesome. I mean, I have contacts. I can help you with that if that's something you're interested in. Yeah. I have no ego in that at all. I think the hard part to some degree is figuring out the right niche of who is accessible, who is willing to do it, because obviously, like I said, we best athlete possible. I don't mind if they come to me for a year and then transfer. It's just, having the conversation.
I was going to say, the conversation obviously is the biggest factor in just, as you mentioned, understanding what they want and where you are and what you need. And obviously vice versa for them. Obviously we do it for them. So what they need in their athletic journey. So I guess my final question for you on level of recruiting, at least I think so, is like the resources. So knowing that you have so many things out there, right? And I just learned actually last episode about like the differences between like D1, D2, D3, JUCOs, things like that. I mean, I knew they were there, but he kind of broke it down for me. Do you find, this is a two-parter, do you find it difficult to recruit girls in the Division III spec versus maybe like a Division I school? And then secondly to that is like the resources that you may have at Caldwell. Do you find it difficult to get girls in knowing that, like resources on the level of, like whenever I talk resources, Division I, they have all the NIL money. They have all the money in the world to give, right? Certain schools, certain conferences, right? SEC versus Pac-12, right? Things like that. So that's what I mean by resources. So do you find it difficult on the level for resources for you, not only to keep your girls for the full 2 years, but also to get them in as well?
Yeah, it's a great question. The previous junior college I was at was D2, so we could offer some athletic aid scholarships. And I think that helps for sure. I think it's nice for ego, when you're recruiting somebody and you say, hey, I can offer you a scholarship. The reality is it's never a level playing field. So if you look at whether it's D1 or D2, whether it's junior college or NCAA, is not everybody has the same amount of money. So
Correct.
Even when I had scholarships, I knew that there were other schools that I was competing against that had more money that they could offer. I had a coach say, essentially everybody on my roster is on scholarship, full scholarship, because he had enough money. Where I was going, well, I'm splitting scholarships to try to get it to people. When Caldwell started, the initial thought is we would start D2 and then go to start D3 and go to D2. And then, you talk about resources. So I went to the AD and I said, to be honest I don't know if that's going to help me. And I don't also want to get into we're trying to raise money in the off season to support scholarships. So, I just said, let's stay D3 because I think we can compete. And obviously our second year we were in nationals, so we were able to do that. Part of that's luck and part of it was just doing work. The resources are, I don't travel across the country to try to do recruiting. It's local tournaments that I drive to, that's within an hour to 3 hours sometimes. It's communicating with recruiting coordinators and sending emails and stuff. So,
you have a lot of, and you do have a good metro right there with Charlotte, and obviously if you wanted to drive a little bit farther east, right to was it Raleigh, and obviously right over that way, right? So you have a decent pool of athletes to go from. So I'm sure it's nice to not have, even though you don't have the athletic scholarships, because you're getting so many athletes from that area. I'm sure that kind of helps out as well, knowing that you don't have to try to bring somebody from Colorado or from Missouri or Montana to come down or to compete, for you.
Right. Well, we do get some athletes from Charlotte, and obviously the population pool is much larger there. I think one of the things that's challenging in recruiting is there's this misunderstanding that coaches will find you. And you probably see this from your side also, and I saw this from high school, that the athletes need to go out and contact coaches, and they need to do it over and over again. And even the girls that are playing for me that want to go somewhere else, as we talk about, you have to repeatedly contact coaches that you're interested in. Because even I have an All-American, she's now committed to another school, is like I would contact schools and I would go, hey, I have an All-American transfer that's interested in your school. And I would have coaches not reply to me, which blew me away. But it's work. And I think that there's this misunderstanding that coaches will find you if you're good enough. And there's just too many people to be able to run down everybody. And so it's not uncommon for girls to come up to me really late and go, hey, I'm interested in coming there. And I go, I don't have a spot for you. I just don't have any roster spots. And then they're like, oh, I didn't realize. So
To go back to what you first said about you'll be found, I think that's certain sports. I think it's certain divisions, or I shouldn't say divisions, certain athletic talent, right? I think every sport has certain areas, right? Like if you're on a travel, as you mentioned, club team ball, right? And you are traveling to national tournaments or even big regional tournaments, you might be found, right? Or you might get player of the year at your state or whatever, right? I think in every year it depends too, because some schools recruit heavier this year versus next year, right? They might have brought in 8 girls this year. Next year they might only be looking for 2, or vice versa. So I think it also plays a factor into it. And as you mentioned about this All-American, coaches, they get spammed a lot, I would assume, with stuff. Like I know for a fact some of my emails that I've sent probably got unlooked at because it's probably spam looking, right? Even though you have the right intention behind it, it's just one of those things. So I think that for coaches and for athletes, being on the high school level and even though I went to the next level and played, it's all about, for one, timing is a big deal, but also, like you said, just showing how much interest you have. And sometimes too, like as you said, that girl who's might be interested in, I don't know, Kutztown and Tennessee State, Middle Tennessee State, or whatever her levels are, right? Florida International. Like sometimes those coaches just, when did you reach out to them? When some of those times, right? Like if you reached out at a blackout window of an NCAA, like they can't talk to you for X amount of time. So maybe that email went under the radar because of the timing. So then it's like, right. Well, but then that's also the part of it as an athlete where if you're undereducated, you don't know, like JUCO, NAI, and D3 are kind of like Wild West. You can talk at any time. But if you're trying to go D1, D2, you have a window that coaches can talk to you. So I think, it's obviously timing and stuff like that, but 100%, it's just showing how dedicated you are to it. And I know for a fact there's probably some schools out there that's like, well, I shouldn't say no for a fact. I feel like there's probably some schools out there that's like, for these last 2 or 3 roster spots, let's see how bad, obviously they might have a list of people that they might have even put on a spreadsheet, but it's like, who's contacting us the most to see, to show their interest type of thing. Don't know if that's true, but, just to kind of show how dedicated you are to wanting to get to our school or the next level or whatever their situation might be,
Right. Yeah. I mean, when you talk about recruiting, I have a spreadsheet of recruits that show interest. And I try to contact them on a regular basis. But at a certain point, if they're not responding on a regular basis to me, how often do you want me to contact you and keep you on my list?
Yep.
And I know that probably people go, well, you're just JUCO. Yeah, but I only have so many roster spots, and I'm pulling good athletes. Like these are good athletes. Like we can compete against D2 schools. I mean, not necessarily the top ranked Division II schools, but but like anybody else our athletes are capable of going and playing at a D2 school or a D3 school. Sure. So if they're transferring there, then we can play with them. So anyway, it's just one of those things of the communication piece is important. So, I guess for recruiting, if people or athletes are listening to your podcast on that is, you don't have to have long conversations with coaches that you're interested in, but just a follow up of, hey, nice win goes a long way to keep you on the recruiting side.
Right. Well, I also think too, which this will lead me to the next question I have for you, but as you're mentioning, like competing with these level as a junior college, like I truly know, and I know for a fact that this is true in wrestling. Back in the day, long time ago, they used to be able to bring in JUCO level, D2, D3, all the national champions from the lower levels could go to the NCAA tournament, the big tournament, and compete. And I know at sometimes in tournaments, some of these lower level people were able to compete and potentially win. I'm sure that I can't remember names and stuff, but I know that at some point in life people had won. But I also know that there's some some junior colleges right now in other sports that I've talked to. Like I just talked to a soccer coach who said that this last spring he took his JUCO to a D1 and beat them 3-2. Right? So like
Yep.
I think that just because you're junior college, you get overlooked a little bit, but at the same time, the talent, as you've mentioned, are comparable with obviously not all the biggest schools, but then, you could compete with D2, D3, NAI, whatever. So that kind of leads to the question of how do you build a program off of, or actually we'll start with this one. How do you build a successful culture on the level of buy-in and mindset?
Well, that's a great question. Culture is such a hard thing to nail down. I mean, we as coaches talk about it all the time, whether it's club or high school or college. I think that for me, it's very common for me to watch a match, high school or club, and to see what happens when they're not doing well. Either they're not playing well or their team's not playing well. And those, if they react the right way, then I'm interested. If they have a tendency to go sit on the end of the bench at a timeout when, people are circled up, or if they stand off to the side, right now we have enough reputation with being ranked that I don't have to take everybody. So it's a lot easier to bypass somebody like that. So I think one of the things is, I'm willing to take chances on people because I think that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to help grow individuals and stuff. But there's only so many of those spots that you can, of course, build a program on. So when I was coaching high school, one of my players, I was watching her at a club tournament, and I took a picture of her while her team was playing, and she was sitting on the bench while the rest of her teammates were standing. And so I went to her afterwards, and I just said, what do you think a college coach is going to think if they're coming to recruit you? And this is what they see. They see you sitting on the end of the bench while the rest of your team is standing. And she kind of was like, yeah, I see what you're saying. Because that's what ends up happening is, you want to see, how players react. Yeah.
Yep. I know that was something that was talked to us in baseball. Like I stopped playing baseball around junior year, but from the beginning of, when I was in 8th grade and that we made the team, or I made the team in high school, they were saying, as soon as you step out of the dugout, you're jogging out, you're running out, whatever, because you're going to look better as a person and as a team. But also if you get to that point of recruiting, right, it's all about the little things. It's what you're saying. It's how you communicate. It's how you're being seen from them. It's like even me coaching my little kids, right? Last year I helped coach my 12U team, or my kids' 12U team. And I was telling them, as soon as I was a little bit more lenient on them. It wasn't as soon as you step out of the dugout, but it was like, as soon as you step over this white line, foul line, you're jogging on the field, and you don't stop jogging off until you get over that line. So like, it was just the little things that were preached on that, like you mentioned, if you are of that talent level to get to the opportunity to go, how are you going to be seen, right? That might be something that goes from like you said, like you might go from a person who you really want to where like now you're on one of those, I'll take a shot on you positions, right? You might go from that to that just off of what they see, off of that first initial reaction or interaction.
Right. Yeah. And I was always kind of, one of the things, and my assistant coach was this way too, is you didn't have to try to motivate me. I was the guy that I loved practice. I mean, if I could dive to try to get a ball, I was diving, and
Right.
because I wanted to see how far I could go. Um, and, and I know that impacts, because I've seen it impact. I've had people go like, dude, you're in practice. What are you doing? And I was like, yeah, this is fun. Like, there's no problems with, going after stuff.
Yeah.
And then I've seen other people then start to do it. So that's what I'm looking for when I'm out recruiting. And, of course, every coach does. And you're always looking at potential and can you coach them up type of
course.
mentality. And, so one of the things that we look at is, in a huddle, are you focused on what the coach is saying, or are you, kind of looking at your water bottle or looking in the stands, disengaged type of thing. So that stuff matters, because I mean, the margin of error in college sports and in good high school sports it's very thin sometimes. And so I saw an interesting stat just for volleyball is I think it's like teams that are like us, where we were 23-4, is we now, not necessarily for us, but like we were winning 54% of the points. And so the difference between winning and losing isn't a huge margin. 25-18. Yeah. 25-18 is a pretty big margin. It doesn't really sound like it, but 25-20 there's a big difference on those 2 points. So
sure.
that makes a difference if you're engaged.
Yeah, no, it really does. Especially if it's I've seen some intense volleyball, either in high school or just on TV for sure. I've seen some very intense volleyball, and obviously, as a guy who never really was around it or obviously didn't play it, good volleyball is actually really fun to watch, especially if it's two competitive teams and go back and forth. So as you mentioned, if you can be, and that's the thing too, right? Like I don't know all the dynamics of volleyball, but I do know you have, rotation, and I know you have subs for certain setups and certain what you see on their side, whenever they have their people in, you're doing defensive subs, vice versa. So I know there's some things that you're doing, and having somebody who's alert to those things, and from that farthest chair all the way up, right? They're all standing and all that stuff. So I definitely understand how important it is to have every person, whether they're playing or not, be involved, because, one miscue of somebody, or maybe somebody struggling, you're in the game, and you got to be able to step up and be that leader, or whatever position it might be, right? To actually produce, especially if it's a good, 4-set, 5-set game. And especially that 5th set, when it's 23-20 or 23-22, like it's real close. It's like at 20 match point in games. I don't care what you say. I'll tell you guys this. If you guys have never watched volleyball, watch a 5-set, 20. You guys go to 25 points in the 5th set still, right? So
it's 15.
Oh, 15. Okay. So go watch a game, go watch a set 5, 14, 13, 14, 12. We'll go watch a game point in the 5th set in volleyball, and I promise you, you're going to see the most effort you've ever seen on either team playing that 5th set. So it's intense. So I can definitely understand why that's such an important piece when you're trying to get girls to your school. That's for sure.
Yeah. It's a great sport. Effort it's so much fun, and I think that's what's the appealing part of it for me is, like how do you coach the effort? I mean, obviously it has to be there to some degree, but just it's an exciting sport. If people haven't watched it, go see it in person for sure. Watch it on TV. I think you'll be impressed.
I agree. So then how do you build a successful program on level of wins, and then how do you sustain that, right? You've done a good job with nationally ranked programs, so I'm intrigued to hear a little bit about it, but just in general, right? Like, how do you build a team that is successful, and then how do you keep it going over time, especially as a JUCO?
Yeah. Like I mentioned earlier in the podcast, this was our third year. And, the first year was almost kind of looking for anybody that would take a chance. And, we found some really, really good people. And so when we would bring recruits in to check out our program, we had the right people. They weren't always the best volleyball players because we had to play some people out of position. But because they were great people, we were able to bring in great volleyball players. Yeah. And so part of it was a little bit luck and a little bit of, shooting for people that I wasn't sure we could get. And kind of the same thing with this year was, looking for people that, would fit. And so I'm a big believer in, you got to have kind of the yin and yang of this person does this well, but this person does this well. And so if one thing isn't working well, then you can go to somebody else that's just different. And so I don't like to settle, but I'm also not somebody that I'm going to go, if you think of a grade, if I go, well, this person I would grade as an 89, I think I might be able to get a 90 or a 91. Am I willing to lose the 89 because I might get the 90 or 91? If they're the right person is, I think that the right culture and the right program is able to sustain that. So I'm not somebody that will lament over, can I get a slightly better person? I shoot for very good volleyball players, but I'm also not scared to pull the trigger. If I like somebody, I trust my instincts on them as a player and as a person. So, if you come into my gym and it seems like a good fit, I'm not afraid to go, hey, let's make this happen type of thing. So, I think one of the things that's challenging for coaches is recruiting is hard. It takes a lot of time and energy. And I think to some degree that's the hardest part of the job because it takes the most time. And so I think at times we have a tendency to go, well, I can get this player, but I don't know if it necessarily moves my program forward. And so I'm always trying to move the program forward, if that makes sense.
It does. Yeah, no, it really does. Always trying to keep that one step better or 1% better every day, and just to continue to grow. And so I 100% understand and 100% agree that that's the only way to find success and to continue to build on success is to keep on knowing that you haven't, even when you get to the national championship and you win it, you still have to try to defend it. So always trying to get better and always try to grow. So that leads me to my final question for you, at least on what I've written down, is my favorite question. It's the name of the podcast. It's why do you coach? What is your coach's why?
God, I think the thing about it is it's intellectually stimulating while athletically interesting. And, it's one of those things I think, like playing this sport it's such a difficult sport to be really good at because there's so many variables that go into it. I think mentally because I'm kind of a math guy and playing all of these different sports, I try to tell girls I literally see angles of how the ball is traveling, where it's coming from, why it's doing that sort of thing. I'm always fascinated by reading interpretation of it. So I think that it's fascinating. I don't think I've played just about every sport possible. And I think it is so different than every other sport because of the need to have a solid team. You can't have one great player.
Yep.
And be successful. Even two great players, you just don't compete against good teams. Right. I think that's the why for me is it's fun. It's challenging athletically. It's challenging psychologically. how do you take somebody that, like, to me, I guess my analogy is it's a little bit like when you get your team, it's like you're a cook and you have all of these are your ingredients and you're trying to figure out, how do you get the best meal from the ingredients that you have? And sometimes you feel like you're on it, and sometimes you're just struggling, and you don't know until the end whether it's successful or not. And I think that's why I like it so much. Is every year is different. Every year is a challenge. I've done a crappy job with like anticipating what's going to happen, either injuries or illnesses, or somebody's better than I thought, somebody's worse than I thought. It's just. And I've done it for a while, and it's just a fascinating thing.
Profession.
So that's my why.
I love that. That you're always that you have so many things that make you intrigued about it, that it's just continually, if you love something, as you mentioned, you're gonna continue to want to do it. And so I love your why. I really do. It was a really, really good. I loved this episode. I thought you did a really good job, or something a little bit different with a lot of the mental being this, like especially on your coach's why, how you mentioned how it's such a mental game, both as a coach, but as a pro or as a sport, that you have to continue to evolve, you have to continue to study, you have to continue to do certain things in order for you to find probably some love in it, right? If you're not doing well, it's hard to love something, but it's also at the same time, at least over time, right? If you don't love something, you're not doing it for 20 years, I should say.
Right.
So it's just one of those things where you just continue to love something and continue to grow. And so I love it. I love the episode, and I couldn't be more thankful that you decided to jump on here with me today. It was a really good one. Hopefully we get you back on again sometime, whenever, maybe even. Yeah, I don't know when, but maybe we can get you back on again.
Yeah, I would love it. I appreciate you reaching out. It would be really interesting to me that my assistant coach right now played for me. And so I think it would be really interesting if you got a chance to talk to her, because her career ended with a knee injury. And so she had to go from a player to a coach. And it's been really interesting trying to mentor her from the standpoint of that change, and like some of her insights on the difference of going from a player to a coach. And I mean, it is when you were an athlete going to a coach, and the difference of how you look at a game and practice and athletes and motivation 100%. And all of that stuff. So I think your podcasts are really cool. I love that you're talking a bunch of different sports and levels, and I think it's awesome.
Well, to go back to what you said, I would love to have her on here. I mean, you obviously the best connection to get her on. So if you want to talk to her about it at whatever time, I'd love to get her on. I can send you, or I can find her email and I can talk to her. But to kind of double back on what you just said, I really appreciate it. I look to, as you said, just like in coaching, one step better every time. Every episode I try to get better, and I really appreciate that you can see that and that you feel comfortable to jump on here, and that's why I'd love to have you back on, because next time we get back on, talk about some other stuff, and hopefully by that time I'll even be better and maybe have a different setup. I plan on doing some bigger stuff with my room and stuff, or the podcast room and stuff. So, but yeah, I would love to have that and have you come back on. Coach, I appreciate everything. If you guys are still listening, thank you guys. It's been a good episode. Hope you guys like these longer episodes. We're no longer doing less than an hour anymore. So we're going real good into depth on these. So, but with that being said, thank you guys for listening. We'll see you guys next time. Peace.